Hello, welcome. I am Kelly Taylor, and as always, thrilled to have you join Jackie and I for today's conversation. We are talking about ISO 27001, and which is becoming increasingly relevant in today's world. And yet, for many of us, it absolutely feels like learning a new language. Now, today's episode, as always, is inspired by our latest newsletter. And we unpack the foundational knowledge you need to get started with ISO 27001, from information security principles and risk management to Annex A controls and all of the genuine ISO favorites, such as the PDCA cycle. You know we love a good PDCA cycle. Good morning, Jackie.
Hello, how are you?
I am very curious today. This is going to be an interesting conversation.
I hope so.
If not entertaining. So before we get into the details, I do want to stick around. I do want to make sure everyone sticks around until the end of today's episode. We have a really exciting announcement that I cannot wait to share. So
I can't wait now either. I'll stick around till the end.
That would be helpful. That would be really helpful. Now, Jackie, as I mentioned earlier, we are talking about 27001 for beginners from the perspective of beginners. Now, you're going to be a little bit more vulnerable. I'm just going to be me. And you're going to put your novice hat on and walk through those essentials. So we all know I like to be across the detail. Today is no different. As I said, I'm a little bit curious. What inspired you to approach this topic from the perspective of a beginner and not just put on your ISO professional hat or rope in another ISO professional?
Well, because you made me. That's the short answer.
Yeah. And there's our podcast for today. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you made me. So, begrudgingly, I set myself the task of going, okay, it's just easier if I write something about ISO 27001. And I think, it's those 2 a.m. times where you can't sleep. And this is, I think, where I came up with, well, hold on a second. There's lots of people like me that have experience, in some ways, that have experience with other ISO management system standards. And a lot of people are curious about, well, can I add on 27001? And I thought, well, okay, well, what if I just go in, with my curious hat on like an explorer and try to understand, if I read the standard, what's the biggest challenge. But that's when I realized the question that we get the most from people is, do I need IT experience? So I thought I'd put a poll up on LinkedIn as well, because I did my own research as well. And as I was doing the research, I thought, hold on, I'm just going to put a poll up on LinkedIn. And I think in the Lead the Standard article, I think there's a screenshot of the poll results. And I suppose that helped me to understand, well, yes or no, does everyone else in that, that beginner stage with 27001, do we need this IT experience that they talk about? Because everyone thinks that information security 27001 is an IT standard. Okay, so that's what's prompted me to go down this path. And then part of that obviously was writing the leader standard. And that's when I realized, I'm just going to put myself out there. I've written this as a beginner doing my own exploration. So what I say might be wrong, and I'm happy for someone to comment and tell me your thoughts, because this is just starting the conversation. I am a beginner. I'm going to be referring back to what I know in ISO 9001, 14001 and 45001, trying to use my experience and adapt it and transfer it to 27001, which is what everyone would do when we're taking on a new standard. I did it, my first standard was 9001, and then I tagged on 14001, and begrudgingly then OH&S. But they all had similar principles.
Yeah, and the HLS makes that so much easier for you.
Absolutely.
As well, high level structure. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Thankfully, this also aligns with that. So
exactly. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of the process I went through to get to this point.
Yeah. So peer pressure is why you wrote that article.
Correct.
And then curiosity followed on from that. Wonderful.
That's right.
So you've told us about the poll. How did it go?
So the outcome of the poll, and I had, as I said, I did some research as well. And we do have our very own InfoSec expert, Dr. George Thomas, who is currently finishing off our ISO 27001 course. So I've been messaging him back and forth as well. The outcome was that we either, yes, needed experience, or no, not really, but it would be helpful. That was sort of the outcome. So based on that, I put together the foundations of like what my own research and then the outcomes of that poll would cover, sort of for our general knowledge. Okay, so I'm sort of putting on the hat of, well, no, but it would be helpful, and then adding on any expert guidance. This general knowledge term that I'm talking about came about in my research. I did find with other organisations that provide ISO 27001 training, they actually in their prerequisites have a general knowledge of IT, which sort of like, what is that? General knowledge of a ISMS, an InfoSec management system. Well, that's what you're doing the training for, isn't it? So that's why I thought I'd go down the path of this general knowledge and maybe help people to get some general knowledge, and then that would support them to do the course. So there's 5 foundational areas which we're going to discuss, and I'm sure you're going to have your own take on it. The first one is information security principles, risk management, the ISMS. So when I say ISMS, it's Information Security Management System framework. Love a framework. Annex A controls, the PDCA cycle, and then legal and regulatory requirements as well. So they're the 5 general knowledge things that sort of popped up to help beginners like me and you to understand what is this general knowledge that we need.
Before you move on, Jackie, I just want to clarify for anyone who is listening that every time Jackie says general knowledge, she is doing finger quotes. But also, I am very aware that Jackie just gave you 6, not 5.
Oh, sorry.
So I can count. We're all good. There were 6 points there for anyone who wants to leave a comment and tell us that we can't count. But that's
there
all
are
good.
6.
We're going to get through all 6 today.
Now I'm scared. Right. Now I'm scared that's in the newsletter.
Well, we can go back and we will fix that.
Oh, we need to do some quick editing.
Quick, PDCA. Yes. PDCA. All right, let's get on to that first one.
Okay, so the first foundation for ISO 27001 knowledge are these information security principles. I love a good overarching principle. So at the heart of 27001 are the principles of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So remember, we're talking about information security here. not dating, because that's what I thought of with availability and integrity and confidentiality.
I don't want to know. Keep going.
We're talking about information security. So, confidentiality ensures that the information is accessible only to authorized people. Okay, so only the authorized people with permission can access this information. Integrity is all about safeguarding, like the accuracy, the completeness of content and information and the methods that are used. And then the availability principle is about, again, ensuring that only authorized users have access to information and the associated assets, like it can actually be accessed. Okay, and that loops into that confidentiality. Now, when I was writing that, remembering I'm a beginner in 27001, but I'm not in 3 other standards, to me, those 3 principles aligned with clause 7.5, documented information, which talks about these things like, being retrievable, that sort of aligns a bit with availability, I feel. It does talk about being identifiable. I think that's the word the other standards use in clause 7.5. To me, that goes with integrity. Okay, and you protecting your records and documents generally. And so in 27001, obviously it's quite specific to information. It's not just documented stuff. It's information as a whole. But then again, when I say that, the same would apply in our other standards with, say, if you've got a platform where your documentation and records are stored. Well, it's like us with a learning management system. There's information on there that we need to ensure is protected. That's the word that they use, protection. So, I don't know about you, Kelly, because you do know a bit about ISO standards also, but that's sort of what came to mind for me, is there's sort of an alignment with your knowledge from documented information from your other standards and how it aligns with these principles.
Yeah, I agree. When I started looking at ISO 27001 a while ago, I had that similar thought. And if anyone's seen some of our Q&A shorts and things with George, that is a question that kind of comes up a little bit. There is that alignment with documented information and those extra oomph. But I love how one of the first principles here is, and again, I feel this is really obvious, but it needs to be said, is that confidentiality element and that integrity. And we've already had questions from people around information security versus cyber security and all those sorts of things. And it does all fit under that standard. But information is so much, as you said, broader than just the tangible things. So there is a lot more to that definition, I guess, is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose maybe, I might be saying this wrong, because you did mention cybersecurity. While 27001, we mostly go, oh yeah, that's information security. It includes cybersecurity. It's in the title of the standard. So obviously, by making our information secure, it's all about preventing those cyber attacks. So this 27001 is building that framework of prevention.
Yeah.
It's actually a good segue to the next one, but if you've got more to say.
But okay, no, before we do skip on, the standard is 27001, information security, cyber security, and privacy protection, information security management systems. So again, when we're talking about that confidentiality, for me, that does come down to privacy protection, GDPR, privacy standards, all of those sorts of things as well. So I kind of lean in that no, it would be helpful camp on the poll, because it's not just about IT. And I think that that's the key thing here. It's not just
Yes.
about IT.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And look, oh, I might be jumping the gun, but I'm just going to go there. It's for me, oh, actually, I just remembered something.
You hadn't noticed that blank stare on your face.
I'm going to go back a few steps because
Yeah.
I think in the Lead the Standard article, I said this, that recently a retired auditor of quality, environment and OH&S said to me rather aggressively that he didn't understand why I couldn't write the information security course because he could. Okay. And I thought about that. I thought, yeah, I could write the information security course. Yeah, anyone could write it.
I could write it.
Yeah, but can you deliver it? The big thing is your experiences and your stories that go along. Like, you know, we can give random examples or, you know, even use ChatGPT to give us some stories, but it's not real.
No.
So anyone can write the course, and this is where this experience is coming in. So to me, if you're moving into 27001 as another auditor from different standards, it would be really great to tag along and observe someone who is auditing against this standard, because you need to start getting some examples. Okay, and this is something that's something I don't have in the industry. I can transfer and relate it back to my quality, environment and OH&S clients for sure. But if I was to move into this standard, then I would be, I suppose, collating some news stories and examples of what others might do. So then there's some context around it, because this is how people learn, from the stories, not just from the statements in the standard. Exactly. So
sorry, I'm just going to refer people back to edition 3 from this year, where we actually talked about the difference of around those career pathways and training and development and coaching and mentoring, and the ability to actually write versus the ability to deliver. Because I said, I could write this course, not a problem, but I can't answer anybody's questions. I can't understand necessarily what I'm writing about, and I don't have those stories and things to share. So yeah, I could write it, but no one would be interested in reading it, buying it, or learn anything from it. So
no, that's exactly right. Exactly right. So that's sort of what made me think that, you know, while as beginners we're sharing this with you, and I'm, you know, sharing how I'm transferring my knowledge from the other 3 standards, I would still like some exposure to, well, what does this look like in the real world? Okay, so that would be great experience to. Oh, I just saw Kelly swing her arm around, and that's why I just stopped talking.
I am gonna pause you there, because I'm going to use what we're talking about to segue into the next section. And I am going to steal your thunder and say that the next topic is the second foundation for ISO 27001 knowledge is risk management. And before I hand that over to you, the first thing that I have identified from that conversation is the risk of a layperson writing the content and misinterpreting something that, while all ISO standards are important and etc., if I found out that somebody had done a course and was looking after my information and my privacy and my cyber, like things relating to my cybersecurity, and they had no idea about any of this, that for me is raising a big red flag and is my first risk that I'm identifying in that space.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I'm going to let you continue on from there.
Okay.
Feel free to rehash what I've just said. all go
Can
from
I
there.
just quickly ask, can you hear
Yeah, we
Spike?
can hear him. This is Spike, everybody. I was ignoring him, hoping that Jackie could hear him.
I don't have anyone else here that can go and manage him because someone's just come through my front gate unexpectedly.
All right, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back in a moment.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Spike's now had his 15 seconds of fame and we are back. So, Jackie, let's continue on. The second foundation for ISO 27001. We touched on it before the break. I'm going to hand back over to you to pick things up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as you said, the second foundation for 27001 knowledge is risk management. So, effective risk management, as we all know, because it applies to our other standards that we're familiar with, it's just all about identifying, assessing, and I suppose putting some controls in place, treating the risk that's identified. Of course, within 27001, it's all about information security risks. Okay, so we just take one hat off, put the other one on, right? Applying the same principles. So this process, the whole risk management process as we know it, and applies to information security, it helps the organisations that we work with to protect against data breaches, cyber attacks, as we mentioned earlier, theft or loss of data, and of course that all feeds into ensuring this business continuity. Okay, how do we keep going if this occurs? Like it's a proactive approach, isn't it? So that risk, actually, that's what reminded me when you were talking before. It's a proactive approach that we with risk management, where we need to identify the risks that have the potential to occur first, and then what preventive measures can we put in place to manage it or mitigate it. But there's always that whoops, something has gone wrong, just like I talk about in the other standards, if it's a non-conformance, and in the event that something does occur, then it ensures that business continuity.
For me, the biggest risk in the ISO 27001 world is the risk of the unknown. And when I say that, yes, that's always a risk, but technology is changing so quickly. And we've had this conversation, again, I think it was in our first episode of the year, around how quickly AI and technology and information and all of these things are so rapidly evolving and changing and improving in the world that you really need to be across and on top of all of those things. And if you're not, you need to have somebody who is.
Yes.
So that's where, yes, that does impact all other standards. But this is where I lean more towards that, a little less no, but it would be helpful, and a little bit more yes, I think you do have IT background. I'm very much on the fence. Yeah, because of this. And again, if you go back and look at some of those shorts that Dr. George and I have done previously, it's something that we talked about a lot, the evolution of information security systems, information security technology, legislation, the lack of legislation's ability to keep up with these standards, all of the new standards that are coming out in the information security technology spaces. So for me, before you even look at those assessing and treating things, you need to acknowledge that risk management isn't a let's get together in the boardroom and do a SWOT analysis and stick it on the wall, and these are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and then these are the risks that come from that once a year.
Yep.
In 27001, for me, I feel like risk management is a daily priority.
Absolutely. And that will also link into, I think it's the fourth one that we talk about, Annex A, which is a little bit unique for 27001.
Call that, shall we?
Yes, yes. So I know that you were saying, yeah, because this is all about, well, do we need this IT experience? But maybe that's a bit of a strong term, because when we were talking about like this risk management, isn't it more like exposure to these different elements? Now, this sort of aligns a lot with people that there's a gentleman that I worked with many years ago, Sanjeet. I was thinking, what's his name? Sanjeet. He lives in Sydney. Do you remember Sanjeet?
I do.
Yeah,
Yes.
lovely guy. He came along to back in the day, we did classroom training. So he is an engineer. He's actually a certification auditor now. He moved into what he wanted to achieve. But as he was moving and transitioning from an engineer, and as you know, engineers are very quality focused. So he was all about quality, ISO 9001. And I remember him contacting me and saying, oh, but Jackie, I'm updating my resume. I've never had a job in OH&S and environment. I went, I know that, Sanjeet, but you work in the resource sector. Like, he was a fly-in, fly-out worker. So middle of Queensland somewhere, he was, I don't know, 7 days on, 7 days off. I said, but Sanjeet, what do you do in your day-to-day when you're out on site that exposes you to OH&S and environment? He went, oh, well, every day we have a stand-up or a toolbox. We talk about the risks on site, hazards and risks, where we all contribute to what those controls could be. And he said, then we have to follow these safe work method statements as well, and they include OH&S environment. I said, oh, so you're involved in putting those together, like your consult? Oh, yeah, we have a whole workshop around it. So we just kept asking questions. He goes, oh, he said, yeah. So while I haven't had a job title with that in there, I've been exposed to it. So now he just had to tweak his resume to include what he was involved in regards to OH&S and environment, because he did have experience in it. So that's why I was thinking, as you were talking around that second foundation of risk management and this, do I need IT knowledge? Can it just be that exposure? Like, oh yes, I worked in this company and we had a cyber attack. All of us were involved in the risk identification workshop after that, and this is what we identified. So they're being exposed to it. They're involved in it.
This is why I love this podcast, because both of us just blurt out our ideas. And I hope our listeners get this same experience too. Blurt out our ideas and they go, well, think about, and you do kind of force us through things. So there is that exposure element as well. Still do lean a little bit one way, but I am very much open to the other way.
It depends on what your exposure is.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I'm not saying it's the solution to it and you're making stuff up. I still feel I would need to have some more exposure.
Oh no, but exactly.
Yes, but others wouldn't. I know other auditors that audit in my 3 standards that have just flicked over because they have had sufficient exposure.
Yeah, and I think, look, the more we talk this out, it is definitely that the area that you're in, because that Sanjeet, I remember that whole period with Sanjeet, and that was so exciting. It was really fun to kind of watch that go off in the background. But as you were talking that through, I was thinking about other situations where I've been in that could certainly relate to this. So yeah, let's keep going, and
Okay,
then
sorry, I
because
have
I'm
talked
going
a
to be honest,
lot.
I've lost track of time today because we've had a break in the
Okay,
middle. But
okay.
we'll keep going, and I'm keen to have a conversation on wrap up around all of these things a little bit more than we normally would.
Okay, so the third foundation for ISO 27001 knowledge is the ISMS framework, so Information Security Management System framework. So an ISMS, and then I just stumbled over it. I wanted to say ISMS management system, but that's a duplicate. Yeah. So
Yeah.
an ISMS, change how I'm delivering this, it provides that structured framework. So, and remember, this framework is all for managing information security risks. So this information can include as basic things as policies, procedures, processes. So that framework and that documented information, we can call it, is designed for us to document and manage our information security with this framework systematically, with a system and a process in place, so it's very clear this is what we do, and this is how we do it, and this is how often we do it, and this is how we check it.
I think the framework is, following on from that conversation we have, definitely, as you like, well, manages the risk. Funny that. But having that framework in place, I'm going to be honest, I've got the standard up in front of me, and as we're recording today, because it has been a little while since I've looked at the standard outside of this week, and I am working on other things in the background, but to have it there specifically. And there's elements in here that you would think are going to be much heavier around this, but they are a lot broader than in some other standards. It is just, you'll just implement a treatment plan. You'll just implement a risk management. It's not as detailed as some of the others, but I think that's because it definitely picks those up within the annex.
Thanks. Yeah.
So, and that's why I said it's an intimidating piece of material, that annex, but it's definitely,
but also comforting.
Exactly.
I feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because when you look at this standard, I was shocked at how, I don't want to say simple. Like, I expected this to have extra clauses compared to, like, extra sub clauses compared to the others. But the way that it has been written is, again, a reason that I sit on that fence, because I can look at this. Annex A, which we're about to get into, does form a big part of that framework.
Yeah.
It does help you to drive all those things. So I don't want to skip ahead too much, but it certainly allows for a lot more, I feel, a lot more tailoring to your organization than some of the other standards do. It does acknowledge the differences in all of the things throughout it without being too restrictive, but also saying, like, this is the basics, and if you get the basics right as part of your framework, the rest of this should be, as you said here, cohesive and comprehensive.
Yeah. Well,
It,
it's sort of consistent with other standards, obviously, because ISO standards are not prescriptive. They don't tell you how to do things. So that's what the uniqueness is. And I know we're jumping ahead of the controls are. So what I'm surprised with the standard is clause 8. It's not, and I've also got it open. Yeah, it's quite,
it's
small.
short.
Whereas I know I was reviewing ISO 22000 recently, and
God.
clause 8 there is. I remember making a comment to our food SME. I thought clause 8 in 9001 was huge, but clause 8 in 22,000 is bigger, and so that's where that uniqueness comes in. And I think that's what you were saying you were expecting, possibly in that operational planning and controls section for clause 8, that operations, you think it would have had a bit more to it, but maybe that's where they've gone into, and I'll
Okay.
segue now into the fourth foundation.
Yeah, let's do it, because I think this is where they're
'Cause
in
we're
nitty gritty.
going there anyway. Yeah. So the fourth foundation for ISO 27001, did I say that right? The fourth foundation for ISO 27001 knowledge is Annex A controls. So Annex A of ISO 27001 provides this detailed, I was going to say massive, huge, but I didn't want to scare people off. It provides a list of 93 security controls, which are designed to address various different parts or aspects of information security. So these controls are organised into 4 categories: organisational, people, physical, and technological controls. So that's nice and easy, that breakdown of those 4 categories. So this Annex A then really provides people working in 27001 a great reference, including organisations, consultants, auditors as well. But it's a great reference point. The key thing here is that you don't need to implement all 93. It's basically a reference for you. Okay, so instead, really, the selection of the appropriate or relevant controls from Annex A should be, ta-da, based on risk. Okay, so identify the risk, and then obviously the specific information security risks relevant to what the business does, and then using that risk-based approach ensures that you're selecting the most relevant control from that Annex A. Now, we could do an entire episode on Annex A, and ta-da, we are next week. So I suppose we could go into more information here, but I found it really interesting when I just touched on it when I wrote this original newsletter. That's why in the next one I decided to devote, again, from a beginner's perspective, a little bit more understanding of these controls in Annex A.
Yeah, and I love that you said here that it is a big list and that it does come across scary, but you don't need to implement all 93. Skimming through that list as you were talking, I can rule out quite a few that they're not relevant to us. But also I can identify quite a few that very much are. I reckon people should just go and have a read of this. It is very, as you said, very interesting. It's a conversation that, again, George and I have had a few times around this Annex A, and I feel like it needs, like you just said, that we've got an episode next week. I almost feel like we need one per control type of control.
We could, or category. Even.
Category, that's what I mean. Yeah. So people, physical, etc. But yeah, this is what I love about it. Because, as I said, I was shocked, and you were right. Clause 8 was really small. I was expecting that to be much bigger. And we've already talked about how we agree that it aligned with Clause 7 around documented information. So I was expecting to see a little bit more, a little bit of stuff in there as well. But again, it's all picked up in this space around the things that you need to consider and implement. Yes. So rather than having this long list in the standard that you need to look at, they've done it this way. And again, this is where I lean towards that no, but it's helpful rather than yes, you need it, because of the way that this has been set out. It's very clear, and it's in beginner language. We're not using big high-tech developer talk. It is very simple layperson's language. This is what your risk is, and then these are the controls that you should consider putting in place. So I do love a bit of Annex A. I'm not going
I do too. As I said, a sort of like a little bit of a security, pardon the pun, security blanket Because it's sort of like giving us examples of what controls we can consider. So, and that this is very unique to an ISO standard. And again, I'm not aware of any others that have this. Certainly not the 3 that I audit in. Certainly not food safety, because that's the other one that we're writing at the moment and I'm reviewing. So, in my small little ISO world, I've never seen it before. So, I do love it, and it's the unique element of 27001.
Yeah. I will note that within 6.13, information security risk treatment, in there it does highlight that it contains a list of possible information security controls. So at the moment there's 93. Who's to say that someone's not sitting in the background right now writing another 193 or they've gone, actually, these are now redundant, they're less, more broad. So it is a list of possible controls. So
Yes.
don't, again, like a checklist, it can be a bit restrictive. So think about it as a checklist is probably a better way to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Okay. The 5th foundation for ISO 27001 knowledge is Kelly's favourite: plan, do, check, act, PDCA cycle. So surprise, surprise, the PDCA cycle is very relevant to ISO 27001. I do remember this because it's something I picked up when I was doing a course review, and I said, because we've got that little PDCA video thing, and I actually said, is this needed in here? Because it's not sort of in the introduction section, I didn't think, of 27001. But Dr. George came back and goes, yes, Jackie, PDCA needs to stay in here. Because, and obviously how all standards are written is in this plan, do, check, act cycle. So it's very relevant, and it supports that ongoing continual improvement, which again is relevant to all ISO standards. So it involves planning the ISMS, funny enough, implementing that plan that you set out to achieve, and then part of that implementation is actually operations. So that's that clause 8 we were talking about before. And then of course monitoring, which is in clause 9, reviewing your performance, and then of course taking corrective actions, which is clause 10. So I just cycled through the PDCA cycle and the clause numbers, not knowing anything or not that much about ISO 27001, but it still follows, and as Kelly said earlier, it's that same high level structure. So because it follows that same high level structure, this continual improvement PDCA cycle applies.
Yeah. And I think, again, like it applies to all standards, but again, I feel it's extra important in this space because you are dealing with a rapidly evolving environment. You can do all of the planning in the world and all of the doing, but if you're not checking constantly in this space, then you're going to get lost and stuck behind, and your risk level is going to
well, that's that exposure again. You're exposing yourself. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So for me, PDCA is more, I feel like it would need to be much more integrated and rather than, well, that's not the right word. PDCA should be integrated into every business regardless of anything if you're going to get anywhere. But I like to do it. We do it here in a kind of, I don't know that our team actually know that we follow the PDA. Well, they do because we talk about it, but it's not, are you following the PDCA?
No.
Are you planning? Are you doing? Are you checking? Are you acting? It's just something that they do. But I think in this space, it might be something that you need to do more consciously and much more proactively rather than just passively as part of your day-to-day. And that might be in that planning phase.
Exactly.
Researching those extra risks. What are the changes in the IT information cyber world.
Well, that should be identified as a risk, that constant change.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's right. So, that would have to be on the risk register, if that's what they're calling it, but that constant change.
But not just on it.
No.
That's the difference.
No.
This space, I feel, and look, again, I'm a beginner. This is how I have interpreted this. I feel in this space very much that needs to be a proactive, constant action activity as part of this. It can't be that passive.
No. Well, if they're building the framework and building the ISMS correctly, and
yes,
I'll just say correctly, maybe it's not the right word, but you know what I mean.
Someone will translate.
If they've identified it as a risk, this constant change, then an outcome of identifying that risk is a strategy on managing it, and then that should filter to an objective. So they should have an objective to constantly stay up to date, research, blah, blah, blah. And then when you've got your objective, there should be a strategy on how to meet that objective. And then in management review, it's all about determining the extent to which that objective has been met. So I've just cycled through, like, if you build it into your system, it shouldn't be missed. Just to support what you were saying.
Yeah. Look at that. We're reverse translating. I'm speaking layperson and you're speaking ISO rather than the other way around.
So what you want to happen is actually how it should happen if you're building your system appropriately, relevantly. Yeah. Okay. All right. The sixth.
Last one.
The sixth, because there are six. I promised
we do six. I promised. Here we are.
So the sixth foundation for ISO 27001 knowledge is legal and regulatory requirements. So this actually falls into risk identification as well. Okay, so being aware of relevant laws and regulations that impact information security management is not just necessary, it's vital. So as I said, by staying up to date with what are the relevant laws and regulations? That's the first step. 2, what do they mean to our business and its operations and its information security? And then 3, how do you stay up to date and current with these changes? So as I mentioned earlier, this should as well be somewhere as identified as a risk. Okay, it's definitely needs and expectations of interested parties. So therefore, it does create that risk, and it goes in line with what you were saying, Kelly, with staying up to date with technology. Well, it's the same. You even mentioned, I think, that legislation has trouble keeping up with the changes in technology. So they sort of work together, don't they?
Absolutely. And this is where I find that, again, this standard has its own unique nuance. If I am working in construction or manufacturing here in Australia and I am certified to quality safety environment, I really only need to think about the legal and regulatory requirements of the Australian government and or state relating to where I am manufacturing, constructing, etc. The interesting thing about 27001 is, hi, here I am, Gold Coast, Australia. On my computer, you're on another part of, I'm in Eastern Brisbane, Australia. Yet we know that some of our technology and systems that we're using are hosted on servers in the US or in Europe because of the the companies that we use to support us with those. So anyone who's uses, for example, the Amazon cloud to manage their stuff, they're not going to necessarily be in the country that you're in. We also have customers who aren't just here in Australia. We have customers quite literally all over the world. So when we look at information security, we need to consider the Australian regulations and requirements. We need to consider the Australian Privacy Acts, but we also need to be across GDPR. I know I'll use California, for example. They have a lot of extra security, privacy things over and above what the US in general has. Europe. So information security, you cannot put those blinkers on and go, well, at my desk, this is the legal and regulatory requirements for me here. You do need to be thinking much broader to all of your systems, technology, and where your customers are.
Yeah.
That's what I find fascinating about this, because you cannot just pigeonhole yourself there. And again, you will have covered all of that in your framework, etc. But these are things that you wouldn't necessarily need to consider when preparing other ISO standards that you do for this.
Absolutely. And I think, oh God, now I've had a brain lapse.
Just one.
No, it's gone. It's
Today,
gone.
she can't count. She's got.
I know. I know.
I did promise that if today was not informative, it would be entertaining. And I guess, look, I've been entertained. I don't know if anybody else has, but I've had fun.
No, I know, because as you were talking, saying, oh, yes, and I actually even started the sentence and then it left.
Yeah, I did see that light bulb in your eye.
Information security issues here.
Yeah. Mental security. Just...
Oh, no, now I remember, because
go.
you were talking about, it's not just local, and it's international, and that is actually the same. I talk about that with environment and OH&S as well, with legislative requirements, because it depends. And you gave that example for us because our operations are international, so then we do have to think of those things for information security. It's the same with environment and OH&S. So it's, well, am I just working, in southeast Queensland, Australia? Then it's just, the state, federal, and local government council. But if your business is going overseas, and there's one client I had that builds golf courses all over the world, well, then they have to understand what the legislation for OH&S and environment is over there. So it's the same with information security legislation. But I think that uniqueness is, as what you said earlier, is that
that physically, well, like I said, the physicality.
No. Now I've got it. It's that it's that it can change very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, and OH&S probably changed as quicker than environment as well, but definitely in this industry, it's more that the industry changes quickly. It's the legislation that might take longer to keep up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop talking before I just forget what I'm here for to start with.
Okay. Let's just say that we're beginners and we're learning like everybody else, and we have ideas and thoughts and all of those things as we're learning, and talking them out is helpful. And if your brain forgets something, well, clearly it wasn't helpful. So let's just...
Well, I think I'm going to blame, because there's so many things going on in my head, and I'm just demonstrating the risk of information security in my brain.
Yeah. Totally scripted this moment. But
that's what I just made up.
But again, it does drive home that point. Like, I just said it, we are beginners, we're learning this standard, we're understanding this standard, and you just said there's so much going through my head. This makes you think very differently. Yes, you have that foundational knowledge, but even you're still questioning, oh, hang on, how does this apply? Oh, hang on, how does this apply? So yes, the exposure, and you've had some exposure, but not that high level exposure. Some exposure helps. And if you don't have that exposure, definitely make sure you have an amazing mentor and to help you along that way. So I am going to start wrapping us up here. So I'm going to let you do your little
summary
close recap for us, and then I've got some things to say.
Ooh, I can't wait. Okay. Obviously I didn't check ahead. So to summarize the 6 foundational points, we talked about information security principles. That was confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Risk management, the ISMS framework itself, of course, the Annex A controls, the PDCA cycle, and lastly, the legal and regulatory requirements. So as always, before I hand it back to the lovely Kelly, I'd like to close with stay curious and lead the standard. By staying curious and leading the standard, you'll continually find new opportunities for growth and excellence in your career.
Thank you, Jackie. I do hope that the chaos of today's episode has demonstrated to everybody that, even beginners do have some sort of understanding, and we've showed how that you can build that knowledge. And then it does, today I really hoped it does inspire some and drive some conversation, I think, around the steps towards expanding expertise into general areas, not just in 27001, but I know that this is a really, really exciting space. My personal highlight this week has been talking it through, because as we've discovered on multiple occasions today, the more we talk something through with somebody else, the more we understand what we do or don't understand. And I think that's really important in this space. I feel like the differences with 27001, now I'm understanding them a little bit differently to what I was 45 minutes, an hour ago from someone else's perspective, because I was leaning much more towards the yes, you need IT experience option. But as we've talked that through, I said it myself, this isn't just about IT, it's about information in general, it's about privacy, it's about cybersecurity. There's so much more to this. So my highlight has been is talking this through and getting a better understanding from somebody else's perspective about what this can mean. And I am really looking forward to talking about it more. Now, before we go, I promised there would be some exciting news earlier. Can I have a drum roll, please, Jackie? I'm asking you for one this week. Done. I'll get Angus to make that sound better. Over the coming weeks, Jackie's talked a few things about Dr. George today and reviewing things and all sorts of things. You are going to see on the Atoll website over the coming weeks some shiny new ISO 27001 micro credentials rolling out across the ISO platform. We will have a micro credential for every clause of this standard. As I said, coming out over the next couple of weeks and months. We are heading towards a couple of brand new 27001 qualifications following very soon after. So introduction to 27001 and then 27001 specialists. And obviously, because that's what we do, lead and internal auditor for 27001. And we know this is something that so many members of our Atoll community have been waiting for. An incredibly exciting opportunity to grow your skills, take your career to the next level, and translate everything that we just talked to into readable, understandable content. As for next week, we will be back with another insightful episode. As Jackie has shared with us earlier, we're going to talk a bit more about Annex A. So I'm so glad you told me what we're talking about, because I had not written that down this week. Thank you all for listening. As always, please don't forget to subscribe, share this episode, leave us a review. And until next time, take care and please keep leading the standard. Goodbye for now. We're off to get some coffee. Bye.